The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and corporate ambition, the kind of room where careers were either built slowly or destroyed in a single sentence. A long glass table stretched across the center, surrounded by expensive chairs that silently reminded everyone who really mattered in the room. At the head sat Mr. Henderson, our regional director, checking his watch with the kind of impatience that made your heartbeat sync with his tapping finger. I sat halfway down the table, hands folded, trying to control my breathing, telling myself again and again not to say anything stupid in a meeting that could decide my future. This was not a normal meeting, not the kind where people pretend to listen while planning lunch. Executives had flown in from headquarters, and the project I had been leading for 6 months was finally being reviewed. My name was on the slides, my work was under a microscope, and my chance at a promotion was hanging quietly in the air. I had prepared numbers, graphs, explanations, backups for backups, but what I hadn't prepared for was myself. Somewhere over the years, I had developed a dangerous habit. I used humor to survive stress, especially self-deprecating humor. It had always worked in casual settings. People laughed, tension broke, and I felt momentarily confident. My brain learned the wrong lesson and decided humor was always the answer, regardless of time, place, or audience. That flaw was about to expose itself in the worst possible way. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, and the room fell silent instantly. He thanked everyone for attending and explained that the purpose of the meeting was to evaluate Project Orion and identify leadership potential moving forward. When he said those words, my chest tightened. Leadership potential. Then he looked at me and said my name, signaling it was my turn to present. I stood up too quickly, my chair scraping loudly across the floor, instantly drawing more attention than I wanted. I greeted the room and clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, clean and professional, and for a moment everything felt under control. I walked them through performance metrics, growth percentages, and timelines. Heads nodded, pens moved, and confidence slowly crept in. That confidence was my enemy. By the time I reached the slide titled Challenges Faced During Execution, my guard was down. I explained that no project was perfect, which was true and safe, but then I paused, smiled, and said that one of the biggest challenges was me. A few polite laughs came out, just enough to fool me into thinking I was doing well. Encouraged, I continued, admitting that there were moments when I had no idea what I was doing, and that sometimes the project survived purely on vibes. The room grew quieter, but my mouth kept moving faster than my judgment. I joked about staring at spreadsheets late at night, wondering why anyone trusted me with such responsibility. This time, nobody laughed. The energy in the room shifted, and I felt it too late. Instead of stopping, I tried to recover by laughing it off, saying mistakes were part of learning, and joking that statistically, if something went wrong, it was probably my fault. That laugh echoed alone, heavy and uncomfortable. Mr. Henderson stopped taking notes and leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. He asked if I was saying I had been unprepared for the role. Panic rushed through me, and my response came out messy and unclear, filled with half sentences and nervous justification. Every word made things worse. I tried to steer back to the data, but my earlier comments had already framed the narrative against me. When questions started, they weren't about the project anymore, they were about my competence. Executives quoted my own words back at me, asking how I managed risk while feeling unqualified, and how I compensated for my lack of experience. I answered as best I could, but the damage was done. By the time the meeting ended, the room emptied quietly, without the usual casual conversations. Mr. Henderson asked me to stay behind. He told me my work was strong, but explained that perception matters just as much as performance. He said undermining myself caused others to question their trust in me, and that this room was not the place for jokes. Then he walked away, leaving me staring out at the city skyline, replaying every sentence I wished I could take back. Sitting at my desk afterward, I realized I hadn't just made a bad joke. I had roasted myself in the most serious moment of my career, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold.
I waved back at someone who wasn't waving at me, started as one of those harmless, blink-and-you-miss-it moments that usually dissolve into nothing more than a private chuckle, but instead, it unraveled into a chain reaction of awkwardness, self-reflection, and unexpected human connection that I still replay in my head with a mix of horror and fond amusement. Because it happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I was already feeling unusually visible and invisible at the same time, walking through the crowded class atrium of my office building where sunlight pours in like a spotlight and everyone looks important and busy and certain of their direction, unlike me, who was distractedly rehearsing an imaginary argument in my head about a meeting that hadn't even happened yet. when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a person across the atrium lifting their hand in what looked unmistakably like a friendly wave. And without thinking, without confirming context, without doing the basic human due diligence of checking whether I was the intended recipient, my body betrayed me and my arm rose in a confident, enthusiastic wave back, complete with a small smile that suggested recognition and warmth. The kind of wave you give someone you're happy to see. And for half a second, I felt normal and connected. Like, yes, someone sees me, someone acknowledges me in this sea of strangers. Until the half second stretched into a full second and then another, and the smile on the other person's face didn't widen in recognition but faltered, their eyes sliding past me to someone directly behind me. And in that micro moment, my brain caught up with my body and screamed, "Oh no, this is not for you. This was never for you." And I became painfully aware of my raised arm, now frozen mid-wave like a faulty animatronic, and the stranger's hand continuing past me in a smooth arc toward the actual recipient, who stepped around my shoulder and waved back with genuine familiarity. And I realized with absolute clarity that I had just waved at a human being who was not waving at me. And that human being had noticed, because how could they not notice a grown adult beaming at them like an old friend? And the blood rushed to my face so fast I thought I might pass out. And in a panic reflex, I tried to convert the wave into something else. A stretch, a casual scratch of my head, a gesture toward a non-existent sign, anything that could rewrite the narrative. But it was too late. The wave had been waved, the smile had been smiled, and now I was standing there, arm halfway up, eyes darting, heart pounding, feeling like the atrium had gone silent just to watch me fail at being a normal person. And the rational part of my brain tried to reassure me that this happens to everyone, that no one cares, that people are too absorbed in their own lives to catalog my embarrassment. But the irrational part had already constructed a vivid montage of everyone in the building whispering about the person who waved at nothing. And so I did what any deeply uncomfortable person would do. I laughed, a short, awkward laugh that escaped without permission, and nodded as if to say, yes, this was all intentional. And then I walked. Not briskly enough to seem panicked, but not slowly enough to appear casual, threading through the crowd with the distinct sensation that my spine had turned into a fluorescent arrow pointing at my shame. And as I replayed the moment in my head, each replay somehow worse than the last, I realized that this wasn't just about the wave. It was about the deep human fear of misconnection, of reaching out and realizing your hand is empty. And that thought followed me into the elevator, where of course I made eye contact with the same person I had waved at, because the universe has a cruel sense of humor. And there we were, standing 3 feet apart in a mirrored box ascending slowly, and I could feel the tension buzzing like static. And I wondered if I should acknowledge it, apologize, joke, pretend it never happened, or simply dissolve into the floor. And before I could decide, the other person smiled at me, a small, sympathetic smile, and said, "Happens to the best of us." And in that instant, something inside me unclenched, because instead of judgment, there was recognition. Instead of embarrassment, there was shared humanity. And I smiled back, this time with genuine relief. And we both laughed, quietly, conspiratorially, like two people who had just survived a social near-death experience together. And the elevator continued its slow ascent. And we exchanged a few harmless words about the weather, about how confusing the atrium can be, about how waving should come with clearer rules. And when the doors finally opened and we went our separate ways, I felt lighter, like the incident had transformed from a personal failure into a funny story. But the day wasn't done with me yet, because as I walked to my desk, still slightly flushed, I started noticing how often these tiny miscommunications happen, how often people smile at the wrong person, say goodbye twice, answer questions not meant for them, how often we are all just guessing our way through social interactions, hoping our instincts are right. And later that afternoon, when I went to grab coffee, I saw someone else wave at a person who wasn't waving at them, and I watched the same realization dawn, the same awkward pause, and instead of looking away, I smiled at them, and they laughed, and we shared that brief, wordless understanding. And it struck me that embarrassment is only isolating if we let it be, that these moments are tiny reminders that we are all a little ridiculous, all a little unsure, and all desperately trying to connect. And as the week went on, the memory of that wave softened, turning from a cringe-inducing flashback into a strange kind of comfort, because it reminded me that perfection is not the price of belonging, that sometimes reaching out, even when it's misdirected, is better than never reaching out at all. And months later, when I ran into the same person again, this time in a completely different context, we recognized each other instantly. Not because we were friends or colleagues, but because we had shared that moment, and we waved at each other deliberately, exaggerated, joyful waves, and laughed.
and it felt like a small victory over the fear that had once made my face burn. And now, whenever I catch myself hesitating, wondering if I should smile first, say hello, raise my hand, I remember that day in the atrium, and I wave anyway, because even if it's not meant for me, even if it's awkward, even as my brain screams, "Oh no," afterward, I know that on the other side of that gesture is the possibility of laughter, of kindness, of someone saying, "Happens to the best of us." And that's a risk I'm finally willing to take.
The second major test came sooner than I expected. A week after the infamous meeting, an urgent client escalation landed on my desk late in the afternoon. A key partner was unhappy, timelines were at risk, and senior leadership wanted immediate answers. Normally, this would have been handled by a director, but Mr. Henderson forwarded the email to me with a short message asking me to prepare a response and join a call the next morning. I read the message twice, unsure whether this was an opportunity or another evaluation disguised as routine work. That night, I prepared differently than before. Instead of rehearsing jokes or casual explanations, I focused strictly on facts, accountability, and solutions. I listed what went wrong, what was being done, and what outcomes could realistically be expected. Every sentence was written to sound clear, confident, and controlled. I reminded myself repeatedly that honesty did not require self-humiliation, and confidence did not mean arrogance. The next morning, the call began with tension thick in the air. The client spoke first, expressing frustration and disappointment. When it was my turn to respond, my instinct pushed me toward humor again, a reflex born from discomfort, but I stopped myself. I acknowledged the issue calmly, took responsibility for the delay without blaming myself personally, and outlined a recovery plan with specific timelines. The difference was immediate. The client's tone softened, questions became practical instead of emotional, and the call ended with cautious agreement rather than anger. After the call, Mr. Henderson asked me to stay on the line. My pulse spiked, but his voice was neutral. He said the response had been solid, and that this was the level of communication expected in high-pressure situations. He didn't mention the previous meeting directly, but the implication was clear. I had just been given a chance to correct the narrative, and I hadn't wasted it. Back at the office, subtle changes followed. People started looping me back into discussions. My opinions were asked again, not cautiously, but normally. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable, like slowly regaining balance after a stumble. I realized that reputations aren't usually destroyed by one mistake, but they are shaped by how you respond afterward. Still, internally, the memory of that first meeting hadn't faded. It haunted me during quiet moments, reminding me how easily confidence could turn into carelessness. I began observing others more closely, especially senior leaders. None of them joked about their own incompetence. They admitted mistakes, but always framed them as challenges overcome, not personal flaws. It became clear that self-awareness was not about exposing weakness, but about managing how that weakness was presented. Weeks later, a follow-up review for Project Orion was scheduled, this time with a smaller group, but the same stakes. As I prepared, I felt the familiar anxiety, but it was different now. It wasn't panic, it was focus. I knew exactly what not to do. I practiced speaking slowly, pausing before answering, and letting silence exist without filling it with unnecessary words. When the day arrived, I walked into the room with a steady posture. I presented the updates, addressed concerns directly, and spoke about lessons learned without turning myself into the punchline. The feedback was professional and constructive. No awkward pauses, no raised eyebrows, no quiet judgment. When the meeting ended, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my mistake, respect returning, both from others and from myself. As I left the room, I understood that the real damage I had done wasn't to my career, but to my own sense of credibility. Rebuilding it required restraint, awareness, and maturity. And just when I thought the lesson was complete, the final outcome was about to arrive, bringing closure to a mistake I would never forget. The final outcome arrived quietly, without drama or announcement, which somehow made it feel heavier. A calendar invite appeared one morning requesting my presence in Mr. Henderson's office. No agenda, no context, just a time and a room. As I walked there, I felt the familiar tension return, but this time it was mixed with acceptance. Whatever the result was, I knew I had done everything I could to recover from my mistake. Mr. Henderson didn't waste time. He told me the leadership review process had concluded and that decisions had been made based on performance over time, not just a single meeting. He acknowledged that my initial presentation had raised concerns, but he also pointed out how I handled the client escalation and subsequent reviews. Those moments, he said, demonstrated growth, judgment, and adaptability, qualities that mattered just as much as raw results. I wasn't given the promotion immediately. Instead, I was placed on a clear development track with defined milestones and expectations. Some part of me felt disappointed, but a larger part understood the reasoning. Trust, once shaken, needs consistency to fully return. He made it clear that the door was still open and that my response to pressure had kept it that way. Walking back to my desk, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The uncertainty was gone. I wasn't being quietly sidelined or forgotten. I had stumbled, learned, and stood back up. The mistake that once felt career-ending had turned into